I didn't plan for it to happen. That's the lie I told myself later, when things got complicated and I needed a softer version of the truth to survive. It started with a single moment I still replay in my head at night. Me standing in the kitchen in an oversized t-shirt, barefoot, on cold tile, laughing at something stupid he said. The apartment smelled like burnt popcorn and cheap wine. It was late. Too late for anything good to happen. When he reached out and touched me, it wasn't dramatic. No force, no urgency. Just his hand brushing my waist like it already belonged there. I should have moved away. I didn't. I remember thinking, it's just once. I remember thinking, it doesn't mean anything. I remember thinking, I can stop this whenever I want. That was the moment everything quietly slipped out of control. If you find this story good, please like and subscribe our channel. It's free for you, but helps us a lot to keep sharing real stories like this. We'd been roommates for almost a year by then. Shared bills, shared space, shared silence. His name was Caleb, mid-20s, easy smile, the kind of guy who made everything feel casual, even when it wasn't. We'd never crossed a line before, not officially, but there had always been something unspoken humming under the surface. Late nights on the couch, lingering looks, accidental touches that didn't feel accidental. I told myself it was harmless because nothing had happened yet. That night, after his hand brushed my waist, he looked at me like he was checking for permission. I didn't give it. I didn't take it away either. I just froze there, breathing too shallow, heart beating too loud. Is this okay? He asked. That question should have saved me. Instead, I nodded. Just once, I thought. It was barely anything. His hand resting on my hip, the warmth of it sinking through fabric. The way my body reacted before my brain could catch up. When he pulled back, he did it slowly, like he was proving he could stop. See? Safe. Controlled. Over. We went to bed like nothing happened, except nothing was normal after that. The next morning, the apartment felt different, charged, like every surface had memory. We didn't talk about it over coffee. We talked about groceries, work schedules, normal roommate stuff. But every time he passed behind me, I felt it again. That awareness, that tightness in my chest. I told myself it would fade. It didn't. Instead, it followed me everywhere. At work, I caught myself checking my phone, more than usual. At night, I listened for his footsteps in the hallway. I started dressing differently at home, then pretended I hadn't noticed. The second time wasn't planned either. That's what makes it easier to justify. It happened a few days later. We were watching a movie neither of us was paying attention to. The couch felt smaller than usual. Our knees touched. Neither of us moved them away. This time, he didn't ask. He just rested his hand on my thigh. Casual, almost lazy. Like it had always been there. My body reacted before my mouth could form a protest. I didn't say stop. I didn't say anything. When I finally stood up and said I was tired, my voice sounded normal. Too normal. Like I hadn't just crossed a line I swore I wouldn't cross. That night, lying in my bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to convince myself I was still in control. It's still just once, I thought. Okay, maybe twice, but that's it. The problem with just once is that it teaches your body a new language, and once you learn it, unlearning feels impossible. The third time happened without a clear beginning. No single moment to point to. Just proximity turning into permission. We stopped pretending nothing was happening. He started knocking on my door at night. Not every night, just enough to keep me guessing. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we wouldn't. Sometimes his hand would find mine, and sometimes it would go further before I remembered to pull away. Tell me if it's too much, he'd say. I never did. During the day, we were still roommates. Polite, friendly, almost boring. At night, everything blurred. Lines I used to respect started to feel imaginary. What scared me wasn't how good it felt. It was how easy it became. I started lying to myself in small ways. Telling myself it wasn't really crossing a boundary because we were both adults. Because we weren't hurting anyone. Because it was mutual. I ignored the part of me that felt uneasy every time morning came. Then came the first moment I couldn't explain away. It was a Saturday. Sunlight pouring through the living room windows. He walked in while I was folding laundry, stopped, and looked at me the same way he did at night. Not roommate Caleb, the other one. I laughed awkwardly and made a joke. He didn't laugh back. You okay? He asked. I nodded too fast. That was when I realized something had shifted. It wasn't contained anymore. It wasn't just late nights and closed doors. It was following us into the day, into the shared spaces, into the version of our lives we were supposed to keep separate. Later that evening, he tried to kiss me in the kitchen. Broad daylight. No wine, no excuses. I pulled back. Not here, I said. He smiled, but there was something new in it. Something that made my stomach tighten. Then where? He asked. I didn't answer. That night, alone in my room, I finally admitted the thought I'd been avoiding. This wasn't just getting messy. It was getting dangerous. Because the more I tried to pull away, the more complicated it felt. Because every just once added another thread tying us together. Because I lived with him, slept 10 feet away from him, shared a lease with him. There was no clean exit. And worst of all, part of me didn't want one yet. I didn't know how to stop something that never officially started. I didn't know how to set boundaries I'd already let dissolve. I didn't know how to go back to being just roommates without destroying everything in between. I lay there listening to the sounds of the apartment, his door opening, footsteps in the hallway, the soft click of his light turning off, and wondered when curiosity had turned into something heavier. Something that was no longer asking for permission. By the end of that week, it wasn't a secret between us anymore. It was a presence. And I could feel it tightening its grip, slowly, patiently, waiting for the moment I'd finally lose control and stop pretending this was something I could handle. I didn't know it yet, but just once was already a lie, and the consequences were already moving closer. Once something crosses a line, it doesn't disappear when you stop talking about it. It just finds quieter ways to exist. After that week, the apartment stopped feeling neutral. Every room carried a version of us I couldn't unsee. The couch where his knee had pressed into mine. The hallway where our shoulders brushed too often. The kitchen where he'd almost kissed me like it was the most natural thing in the world. I started timing my movements without realising it, waiting to hear his door close before leaving my room, lingering in the bathroom when I heard him in the living room, pretending to scroll on my phone when what I was really doing was listening. The thing that scared me most was how aware he seemed of it. Caleb never pushed directly. He didn't corner me or demand explanations. He just adjusted, gave me space when I pulled away, smiled like he understood when I avoided eye contact, acted like everything was fine. Too fine. At night, I lay in bed replaying conversations, trying to decide if I was imagining things, trying to convince myself I still had control, that I could draw a line whenever I wanted. Then he started testing that line. Small things at first, standing a little too close when we talked, sitting beside me instead of across from me, letting his hand linger when he passed me something. Always just enough to be deniable. I hated how much my body responded before my mind could intervene, how my breath changed, how I felt that pull even when I didn't want to. One night, he knocked on my door again. I didn't answer right away. I sat on my bed staring at the handle, heart racing, telling myself to stay quiet, to let the moment pass, to choose the version of myself who still believed this could be undone. He knocked again, softer this time. "Hey," he said through the door. "Just wanted to check on you." That sentence should have annoyed me. Instead, it cracked something open. I opened the door. We didn't touch at first. We talked. About nothing important. About work stress. About how weird it felt living with someone during a phase of life that was supposed to be temporary, but never was. At some point, he sat on the edge of my bed. I didn't tell him to move. When his hand brushed mine, I pulled back. "I don't want this to get weird," I said. He nodded immediately. "I know." I waited for him to stand up, to leave, to respect the boundary I was finally trying to set. He didn't. Instead, he said, "Then tell me where the line is." I froze, because I didn't have an answer. Everything felt blurred. There was no clear start, no clear stop, just a growing tension that made every decision feel delayed, like my brain was buffering while my body already knew what it wanted. "I don't know," I admitted. He looked at me carefully, not predatory, not innocent either, just aware. "That's okay," he said. "We don't have to do anything." But he didn't move away, and neither did I. When he finally left, nothing had happened, not technically. No touching, no crossing, just proximity and unspoken possibility. It felt worse than before. The next day, I avoided him completely. Took my laptop to a cafe, stayed late at work, came home exhausted and went straight to bed. That's when he texted me. "Did I make you uncomfortable last night?" I stared at the screen for a long time. The honest answer was yes, and no, and something messier in between. "I just need space," I typed. "I get it," he replied. "Take whatever you need." For a few days, things settled. We went back to polite roommate behavior, shared meals without tension, passed each other in the hallway like strangers again. I started to relax. I told myself maybe that was it. Maybe we'd scared ourselves enough to stop. Then came the night, everything shifted again. It was raining hard, the kind of rain that rattles windows and makes the world feel smaller. The power went out without warning. The apartment went dark, silent except for the storm. I was in the living room when it happened. He came out of his room with his phone flashlight on. We laughed at the timing, at how dramatic it felt. We sat on the couch, leaving space between us. The rain filled the silence. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. "For what?" I asked. "For making things complicated." I nodded, staring at my hands. "I don't want to mess this up," he added. Something in his voice made me look at him. Not apologetic. Honest. "I don't either," I said. The lights stayed off. The rain kept falling. The moment stretched. When he reached for my hand, it felt different this time. Slower. More deliberate. Like a question instead of an assumption. I didn't pull away. That was the night, just once, stopped being something I could pretend meant nothing. We didn't go far. We didn't have to. The closeness itself felt like crossing a threshold. When I finally stood up and said I was tired, he let me go without argument. But the damage was done. After that, everything accelerated. Not dramatically, not all at once, just steadily, like gravity finally winning. He started coming into my room more often, always knocking, always waiting, always letting me decide how far things went, at least on the surface. I told myself that meant it was safe, that I wasn't being pressured, that I could stop whenever I wanted. But stopping started to feel less like a choice and more like a loss. I noticed how much I anticipated him now, how my mood shifted depending on his attention, how the apartment felt empty when he wasn't home. That scared me more than anything physical ever could. One night, after he left my room, I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard, not because of what had happened, but because of how much I wanted it to keep happening. I saw myself clearly then, not as a victim, not as someone being taken advantage of, but as someone walking willingly into something I knew would end badly. The next morning, he made coffee for both of us like it was normal, like we weren't slowly dissolving every boundary that had kept our lives simple. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, again. Lying had become easier than telling the truth. The truth was, I didn't know how to pull back without blowing everything up. I didn't know how to reestablish distance without admitting how close we'd gotten. I didn't know how to share a home with someone who now knew exactly how to unravel me. And deep down, I knew something else too. This wasn't staying contained much longer because what had started as curiosity was turning into expectation. Because his patience was thinning in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. Because every time I said yes, it made the next no harder to say. I told myself I'd handle it soon, that I'd figure it out, that I'd draw a line before things crossed into territory I couldn't come back from. But control doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes. And by the time you realize it's gone, you're already standing somewhere you never meant to be. Wondering how something that was supposed to be, just once, had started to feel like everything. By the third week, the dynamic between us had completely changed. The apartment was no longer just a shared living space. It had become a stage for tension I couldn't escape. Every corner, every routine, every casual glance had weight. I could feel him watching me in ways I couldn't quite name, but that left my stomach twisting. I tried to rationalize it. It's just curiosity. It's harmless. But harmless didn't make my pulse race every time he entered the room. It didn't make my hand shake when I reached for my mug and felt him standing too close behind me. It didn't make the silent way he could convey desire with a glance feel okay. He started leaving little things that reminded me of him. A jacket draped over the couch where I'd sit. A cup of coffee waiting on my desk in the morning. Notes that seemed innocent. Thought you might need this today, but carried a subtext I couldn't ignore. It was as if the apartment itself had been rewritten to center him, and I was just living inside his story. And I couldn't stop participating. I wanted to. I told myself I wanted to. But the pull was stronger than logic. Every time I thought of drawing a line, it blurred before I could reach it. Every time I resisted, he'd smile in a way that made me doubt my own intentions. One night, we were both awake late, the apartment quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I was scrolling through my phone in the living room when he sat next to me, not touching, just close enough that the warmth of his body brushed mine. "Hey," he said softly. I didn't look up. "Can I ask you something?" I hesitated, my heart already racing. "You know how we started this?" He gestured vaguely. "Just once?" I swallowed. "I can't stop thinking about it," he said quietly, almost like a confession. I froze. That sentence should have made me step back, close the distance, reassert my boundaries, but instead, my chest tightened, my body reacted, and I felt the familiar tangle of excitement and fear I couldn't untangle. "It's getting out of control," I whispered, not sure if I meant him or myself. He nodded, like he already knew. From that moment on, nothing stayed the same. Every touch, every lingering glance, every casual proximity carried the weight of escalation. What had started as a just once permission was now a pattern I couldn't break, a secret dance we both understood but didn't speak about. I began avoiding certain rooms at certain times, timing my movements around his presence, but it was no longer enough. His awareness of me, my reactions, my hesitations, made the boundaries I tried to enforce nearly meaningless. He learned them, tested them, and adjusted without ever stepping over an overt line. Workdays became a different kind of tension. Coming home, I felt the pull before I even opened the door, knowing he'd be there, waiting, patient, calculating. The apartment itself felt like a trap, designed to keep me aware of him, aware of my own desires, aware of how easily I could be drawn back in. There were nights I stayed in my room, pretending to be asleep, only to hear the soft shuffle of his feet in the hallway, the quiet rapping on my door, the hesitant question, "You awake?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to say, "Leave me alone." I wanted to tell him this was a mistake, this couldn't continue, that, just once, had already become too much. But every time I heard his voice, part of me ached to answer yes. Part of me ached to let him in. Part of me ached to be tangled in the same danger I told myself I should avoid. And that's when I realized the truth. The line I thought I could control was gone. I wasn't leading this. I was participating in a current that was pulling me deeper. Every choice I thought was mine became another link in a chain I couldn't break. Even as I tried to sleep, even as I told myself I needed distance, I knew he was already inside my thoughts, already rewriting my nights, my mornings, my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't about a single touch anymore. It wasn't about curiosity or a mistake. It was about momentum, about desire, about a quiet, dangerous escalation that neither of us wanted to name, but both of us were living. By the end of that week, I had to admit something I hated. I didn't know how to stop it. And part of me didn't want to. The problem wasn't him, and it wasn't entirely me. It was the way one small decision had grown, quietly, powerfully, until it consumed more of our lives than I could have imagined. And now, there was no turning back. By the fourth week, the pattern had solidified. What started as a single brush of a hand had transformed into a constant undercurrent, running through every part of my life. I felt it the moment I stepped into the apartment, the moment I opened the door, the moment I heard him move in the kitchen or the hallway. There was no neutral space anymore. Every shared wall, every shared corner, carried a tension that made my chest tighten. I tried to act normal, pretend it was just roommate life, just casual living. But normalcy had become impossible. Every interaction carried double meaning. Every glance, every casual touch, every joke seemed loaded. And the worst part? I couldn't stop anticipating it. My mind ran ahead of me, imagining every scenario, every possibility, every risk. One night, I lay in bed, listening to him move around the apartment. The rain was pounding outside, and the sound made everything inside feel more intimate, more intense. I told myself to sleep, to ignore it, to reclaim some part of my life. But my body betrayed me before my mind could catch up. Every small sound, every shift, made my pulse jump. Every knock on my door made me startle, knowing what might follow. That's when he came in. Quietly, gently. I knew before I opened my eyes who it was. He didn't speak at first. He just sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that I felt his presence like a weight pressing down, like a secret I couldn't ignore. "I didn't want to bother you," he said softly. I closed my eyes and exhaled, pretending I'd been asleep, pretending I didn't feel the thrill of his nearness, pretending I wasn't thinking about all the times I had told myself, just once, and how that promise had already been broken. "I know," I whispered, barely audible. Then his hand found mine, slow, careful, testing the waters without demanding permission, knowing full well my response would betray me. And it did. My fingers twitched, my body stiffened. I didn't pull away. I couldn't, not fully. He smiled at me, the kind of smile that was patient and knowing, the kind that made the air between us feel electric and dangerous at the same time. I wanted to speak, to tell him no, to remind myself of every boundary I had once drawn. But my voice felt stuck. And the truth was, part of me wanted him to stay, wanted to feel that closeness, wanted to let myself surrender to it just this once, again. Hours passed like that, not talking, not moving much, just existing in the same space where everything had shifted. Every sound from the storm outside echoed like a heartbeat in the room, a reminder that the world could crash around us while we were here, suspended in this dangerous rhythm we had created. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it would be different, that I could regain control, that boundaries could be reestablished. But by the time he emerged from his room, casually sipping his coffee and pretending nothing had happened, I knew better. Nothing would ever be the same. Every glance, every casual gesture, every shared joke carried a weight that hadn't been there before. I started noticing how I adjusted my routines to avoid confrontation, and simultaneously to create opportunities. I timed when I left for work, when I returned, when I took showers. I arranged our shared spaces to minimize accidental closeness, or to maximize it, depending on my own conflicted desires. I hated myself for it. I hated the way my body responded before my mind could intervene. The way my chest tightened whenever he laughed too close. The way my stomach fluttered when his hand brushed mine, accidentally, or perhaps intentionally. One night, I tried to set limits. I told myself I would finally take control. I would make him understand that this could no longer continue. But when he knocked on my door, gentle, patient, and with a look that made my resistance crumble, I froze. I didn't answer immediately. I sat there, heart pounding, hoping he would leave, hoping I could hold the line. He didn't leave. Instead, he whispered my name, soft and low, and the apartment suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were pressing us together. I felt the familiar pull, the dangerous allure that I had been denying to myself. My resolve faltered. I knew the line had already moved, stretched beyond recognition. By the end of that night, I had to admit it to myself. Control was no longer mine. The chain of just once had grown too long, too strong, and I had been walking willingly into it. Every decision, every small choice, every silent consent had led me here, and I could no longer distinguish between my own desire and the momentum of what we had started. The apartment was no longer a home, it was a stage, and we were both actors, improvising on a script that neither of us wanted to write, but neither of us could stop performing. And as I lay in the darkness, listening to the storm outside, I realized with chilling clarity. What had started as a single, harmless touch had already spiraled beyond my control, and I had no idea how to stop it before it consumed everything I thought I could keep safe. By the 5th week, the situation had escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. The apartment was no longer neutral ground, it was a pressure cooker, every room charged with tension. Every glance, every step, every accidental touch carried a weight I couldn't shake. My mind screamed for boundaries, for distance, for normalcy, but my body and emotions had long stopped listening. It all came to a head one night. We had stayed up late, pretending to work on separate laptops, pretending we weren't aware of the electricity crackling between us. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside me, unpredictable, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. I could feel him observing me, not in a predatory way, but in a way that made me aware of myself in ways I wasn't prepared for. "I don't want this to ruin our friendship," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. I closed my eyes, nodding. Words failed me because I knew the truth. It already had. We didn't speak for a long moment. Then his hand found mine, slow, gentle, insistent enough to remind me that boundaries had blurred beyond recognition. My chest tightened, my stomach fluttered, and I realized I wasn't pulling away. Not fully. I wanted to. I tried to. But the desire, the tension, the momentum of weeks of just once moments had pulled me into a current I could no longer resist. "I can't stop thinking about this," he whispered. And in that moment, I admitted to myself what I had been avoiding. Neither of us would stop. Not yet. Not willingly. The power of curiosity, desire, and the forbidden had created a cycle neither of us wanted to break. Every small choice, every silent consent, every private moment had woven a web that kept us bound together. The next few days were surreal. We continued to live under the same roof, performing normal roommate behaviors during the day, while the nights held their own rules. Proximity became a test, laughter a temptation, silence a promise of possibility. Each touch, each fleeting glance, carried the weight of anticipation. I felt trapped, not by force, but by my own complicity. I began to see the truth about myself. I realized that what started as curiosity had become a dependence I didn't know how to untangle. My identity had intertwined with this dangerous game. I wasn't entirely innocent, and he wasn't entirely to blame. But the situation was spiraling faster than I could contain. One night, lying in bed, I whispered to myself what I couldn't tell him. I don't know how to stop this. I don't know if I want to. And the terrifying thing was, part of me didn't want to stop. I wanted it. I feared it. I hated myself for feeling both at once. I hated how much I was drawn in despite knowing the consequences. And then came the realization that shook me more than anything else. This wasn't about a single touch anymore. It wasn't about curiosity or experimentation. It was about momentum, about control lost, about desire taking over caution, about a line that no longer existed. That night, I made a choice. Not a conscious, planned choice, but a surrender to the truth I had been hiding from myself. I let myself acknowledge the reality. I was in this, willingly, dangerously, completely. And there was no turning back. The next morning, the apartment was quiet. He made coffee for both of us like nothing had changed, like the storm had only passed outside. But inside, everything had shifted. I knew we were teetering on the edge of something bigger than either of us could define. Every smile, every casual brush of hands, every shared space carried the weight of the unspoken truth. I realized then that the hardest part wasn't the physical closeness. It wasn't the touch, or the forbidden tension, or even the escalation. The hardest part was the psychological gravity we had created. The way my mind, my heart, and my body were now all aligned in complicity. And in that moment, I understood something I had feared all along. Just once is never just once. It's the door you open and cannot close. The line you cross and cannot redraw. It's the temptation that grows stronger the more you indulge it, until it consumes more of your life than you ever intended to give. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if we would crash, or if this dangerous balance would continue indefinitely. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would ever feel normal again. Every glance, every touch, every silent moment between us now carried the weight of weeks of blurred boundaries, and I had no idea how to stop it, or if I even wanted to. The apartment was no longer home. It was a stage, and we were both actors, improvising a performance that neither of us fully understood. And yet, I couldn't look away. If you find this story good, please like and subscribe our channel. It's free for you, but helps us a lot to keep sharing real stories like this.